Okay, so in the last lesson, we created a C++ class and a blueprint class, and we parented our blueprint class to the C++ one. We also created booleans in blueprint and in C++. So let's take it a step further. Let's add a function. Doing that in blueprint is pretty easy. You just mouse over the function plus function button and give it a name, my VP function. Okay, that's it. Compile, and now you have a function that you could call. So how do you do that in native? Well, it's a little bit more complicated, but if we jump back to our character header file that we created earlier, or that was created for us, I guess, we can declare our own function right underneath the boolean. And the way we do that is we say void my CPP function and then parentheses. What does void mean? Void means there is no return type. Functions can have return types, but in the case of our blueprint function, there is none, because we never specified an output. So a function without any output at all is considered void. It's also complaining because it's saying that the function definition for my CPP function not found. Well, this is because we haven't really added anything to our CPP file. We've defined a function here, but we've never given it any implementation. So if we go to our CPP file and we copy paste my CPP function in here, we need to add a namespace for this function, which in this case is A for actor, my CPP character, double colon, my CPP function. The reason we've added this is because without this part here, this function is just kind of floating in this file. It doesn't know where this, where this function should reside. By adding that namespace, we're saying that this is an implementation for my CPP function, which resides within my CPP character, and it has no return type. And then in the curly braces down here, we could put whatever we want. And that's the exact same as this here. It's a blank slate. You could add something neat, but there's nothing right now. Cool, so at the moment these functions are identical. But if we want to be able to see the native function in our blueprint, we're going to have to add metadata to it, very much like we did with our Boolean. It's a little different with functions than it is with variables. You have to type ufunction and add a specifier. Blueprint callable is what we're going to probably want. This allows us to actually call the function in a blueprint, and that's all we need. So if we compile the code right now, take a moment. Okay. So we'll go here and we'll see. And now we have my CPP function. So we have two variations of the same function. One which we've defined in our native code here, and one which we've defined in Blueprint here. So that's pretty cool. But this is a really basic function. It doesn't have any return value, it doesn't have any arguments. Let's make it a little more complicated. So in Blueprint, we can add an input. And let's say there's an integer. Call it inValue. And let's say there's an output that's a Boolean. That's pretty common, right? So if we compile that, that'll work for the blueprint. We now have a value we can put into it and a value that can be returned from it. So how do we approximate that in C++? Well, it's not that hard. We change the void to the return type of the function, which we know is a Boolean value. So void becomes bool, and because we've changed it here, we also need to change it here. Also, because there is now a return value, this implementation has to return something. It has to return a Boolean value, otherwise it won't compile. Previously, it was void, so it didn't need to return anything. But adding a return type makes it mandatory that it returns any value at all. So for example, we could say return true, and that would be fine. In Blueprint, the implementation returns false automatically here. So to make this more correct and match the Blueprint implementation more closely, we should probably say return false. Also, in the Blueprint we have an integer that's being passed into the function. So how do we do that in native? Let's go back to our function definition, and inside the parentheses here we're going to say int 32. You can also say int lowercase. Int 32 is just more correct. And we'll say in value. And again, because we've done it here, we need to reproduce the change here. Otherwise the code won't compile. So that's all we need to do. And if we compile our code, magically we can now see that we have a return value and an in value for our C++ function, which is identical to our Blueprint function. So that's how you add arguments to functions in C++, as well as specify return values for them. Thanks for watching.